All right. Happy Thursday, friends. Today we are talking all about analog, which is Ableton's built in analog modeling synthesizer. It's actually a really great piece of equipment to use. I definitely think you are going to dig it. We're going to talk all about the details of everything, but before we do that, if you are here and you can hear me, feel free to let me know in the comments, just so I can make sure that all the audio is clear and all that. All right, good stuff. So, analog synthesizer. I'm going to go ahead and waste no time. Let's jump right into this. So, analog looks like this. And if you're having a hard time finding it, you can head over here to your browser, instruments, and just drag and drop analog in. So, analog, it's one of those things where you look at it and you're kind of like, what is happening here? And the reason for that is that we just want it to fit nice in the bottom of the screen here, right? It's designed to work with Ableton specifically, so we don't want to have a synthesizer here that's got pop-ups and you're looking at stuff. It just sits really nice. It's easy to look at, and so let's chat about kind of how the layout of things works here. So, analog is a synthesizer with two oscillators, and oscillators are the sound generating part of any synthesizer. So, anything that creates sound in a synthesizer is called an oscillator. Now, if you haven't already done it, you can check out below in the details, and you can grab a copy of my quick synth map, and that kind of details exactly what all of these things do. So if you're like, oh, I've never heard of an oscillator before, and you're wanting a little bit more of an in-depth on that, it's a good place to start. So synthesizer, this is analog, and it works left to right. So we've got our oscillator here, which is our sound generator, going into a filter, and that is a sound shaper, I like to call it, which goes into an amp, and that is like, if you had a guitar amp and you plugged into it, it would be an amp. It's the thing that creates the actual sound. And then we've got these two master menus here. So those are just kind of the main parts here, but something important to notice is that when I click in, I've got these contextual menus here. So each one of these areas, your oscillator, your filter, and your amplifier, all has some extra controls. So I like to say that anything you can see on the synthesizer itself, these are sound controls, right? So these are things that create sound. These are things that shape sound, and it has only to do with sound. But all sound actually has two pieces. It's got sound, and then it's got the over time, right? So if music is sound over time and you take away time, then sound sort of doesn't exist, right? It has to exist on a timeline. So our time controls, anything that has to do with changing the sound over time, lives in these contextual menus in the center. And we'll go through those in detail in a bit here as well. But for now, these are our time controls. And in a synthesizer, a time control is always called an envelope. And an envelope is made up of four parts. So can check this out here. This is a picture of an envelope. We've got the attack, which is the amount of time it goes from no sound at all to maximum expression. In this case, this is a filter envelope, so maximum filter expression. We've got our decay, which is the amount of time it takes to reach a resting level. We've got the sustain, which is setting the actual resting level. And then we've got the release, which is the amount of time it takes to go from resting all the way down to 0. So that lives here. And also in the contextual menus, you can control how much that envelope is going to affect the sound, and some other things like how much the keys you're using will affect that sound, and LFOs, which live over here. So this is just the top, and if you're looking at this going, well, hey, the bottom is also there. We haven't talked about that at all. The reason for that is the bottom and the top are actually 100% the same. We have oscillator, which you can toggle on and off by clicking here. We've got our filter, which you can also toggle on and off, and your amp you can toggle on and off. And the cool thing about this as well is it can either be set to have just one amp creating a mono sound, or it can be set to have both amps creating a different signal on each side. It helps you get a bit of a stereo effect here. So let's just start with the oscillator. How to use analog for beginners. If you are a brand new beginner and you've never done this before, that is okay. We're going to talk through every single detail so you know exactly what you're up against. So our oscillator, in this case, has 4 different types of sound. And we're going to start with a sine wave because that's the most basic type of sound. So sine wave is it's a really gentle sound. And there's not a ton of stuff happening harmonically. So let's go ahead and check out what it looks like in an EQ so you can kind of see. So when I play a note, it's going to show me where that note sits, right? And I'm playing a G. So here it is, G3. And there's not a ton of extra harmonics that are living up here. It's really just the fundamental. And there's some extra stuff here because analog is meant to sort of imitate some old school equipment that has natural extra harmonics built in. So that's a super simple shape. But next we have this sawtooth wave, and you're going to see right away that this is a very different looking sound. So we've got that first fundamental right here, and then a ton of extra harmonic information. And you'll notice to your ears that registers a lot buzzier. It's got a lot more of a punch. And this is a really common starting place for a lot of sounds because it gives you something to work with. Now, analog is a subtractive synth, and what that means is you start with a ton of sound, and then you pull sound out of it. You kind of mold it. Subtractive synthesis is like sculpture, where you start with a ton of information, and then you kind of pull things away from it. So subtractive synth, this is our sawtooth wave. If you've ever made a super saw, it's a ton of saw waves stacked on top of each other. All right, here's our square wave, which also has a ton of upper functioning harmonics here, but it's different, right? Listen here again. They're a lot more present in the upper register in this particular square wave. Now, one thing we have with a square wave that we don't have with any other wave is you can adjust the pulse width. And that happens in this contextual menu down here where it says width. So here's how the sound changes. So this wave itself is kind of unique in that it has the potential to produce a lot of different sounds on its own. So this is our menu that we can choose our sound. And this bottom one here is noise, and that's exactly what it sounds like, noise. Cool. All right, so it looks like you can't see all of that EQ there. Should be helpful. There we go. That'll do it. So, there we go. That's our noise. Now, we've got some other controls in here. We've got this F1, F2, and what this guy does is it controls how much of this sound gets sent to filter 1 and how much of it gets sent to filter 2. Now, in this case, we don't have amp 2 on, so if I sent sound to filter 2, it would just go nowhere, right? So, not much to see there. And then we have this volume knob here, which adjusts the volume. And double-clicking on any of these parameters are going to set them back to their default settings. So if you did something you didn't like and you want to bring it back to normal, you can totally do that. So let's talk about these 3 knobs here. So we've got octave, we've got semi, and we've got detune. So octave, this is a musical word for 8 white keys on a piano, or 12 half steps is another way to look at it. Or if you're thinking about it in terms of sound, it's actually doubling the frequency. So demonstrate this with a sine wave. So right now we've got this frequency here, and it is C3, which is coming in at 253 hertz. And if I do 1 octave higher, play the same key on the keyboard, but adjust this up, it's coming in at about 500, so it's double the frequency. And if I do that again, coming in at about 1K, so double that frequency, and so on and so forth. And this is a really handy feature because, well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you are a keyboard player like me, perhaps you're building a patch that you want to play in one area of your keyboard, but to sound in another. But if you're just designing sounds, you may want to layer 2 different oscillators on top of each other in 2 different octaves. And remember, when we have sounds that are complex like this, and we've got all these upper function harmonics going on, those are all important parts of the sound. So when you pluck a string on a guitar, or you blow into an instrument, you might be hearing one fundamental frequency, but that frequency is made up of lots of other not fundamental frequencies. So we sometimes use octaves to create a realistic effect. And when we're synthesizing things, there's certain things that you hear and you're like, that's a synth. But sometimes you're like, no, I want this to sound pretty close to what I'm modeling, right? So that's one way we can use that. Now, this next knob is semi, and that is short for semitones or half steps. So I'm playing C, and when I change this to 1, it's C sharp, and so on and so forth. So this is an interesting way to make chords. If I have... which is one way to do it. And you can also do other things where you set the semitone to be dissonant to create like a bell type effect. We'll come back to that in a second. But so those are our semitones. And then we have this detune feature. So this is the smallest one. And again, analog works from left to right. So biggest, medium, small. So I'm going to play C and adjust this knob. So this is our detune. Now, at the extremes in both directions, this is actually going down a minor third. So if you're playing a C and you detune this, you've got an A. And if you're playing a C and you detune this, you've got an E flat. So these are our 3 knobs that affect pitch. Now, detuning is often used to create some interesting phase cancellation or to just make it be a more natural sound, right? So detuning, and when we turn on oscillator 2, you'll really hear this. So the next box here, we move from left to right. Oscillator is our filter, and a filter is a sound shaper. So I'm going to play a sound here. Let's, we could stay with square. And listen what happens as I move this knob. So this is actually taking away certain parts of the frequency, and that's where the name subtractive synthesis comes from. We're taking a sound that's robust, that has a ton of upper function things happening, upper harmonics, and we're cutting them out. We're shaping them. So we actually have quite a few different options for filters. So this first one that I showed you is a low pass. And what a low pass filter does is a low pass filter says anything below this point can stay, but anything above it is out. So as I adjust this frequency, anything that is below 1.3, which is right here, stays, and then we subtract 12 dBs per octave after that. Now resonance, this next knob, boosts the cutoff frequency. So here's my 1000. Watch what happens right here when I increase this resonance. So we're boosting right at that cutoff. And it does also affect some of the stuff happening at the top as well. Okay, next one, we've got this low pass 24 dB per octave. So this is just more extreme. So if I'm at 1.5 and I switch, less extreme, more extreme, and I can increase resonance, turn up a little bit of a boost at the cutoff point. Now again, we have two filter 2 here, so you can actually shape the sound and then send the shaped sound to be further shaped in filter 2 if you so decided. So I could turn filter 2 on and turn amp 2 on, and we can filter that twice. But for now, we're gonna keep moving across the board here. So band pass. A band pass filter is kind of like a TP. It's like the TP of filters. So what it does is it selects an area and it just isolates that area on its own. So let's see. I think it may be easier to demo this with an auto filter. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm turning this filter off. But in auto filter, I am going to select a band pass so you can see what it looks like. So it selects an area, and everything outside of that area does not pass through. So as I move, you can just select what area you want. It's a pretty cool ability there. Turn that off, turn this back on. So same deal here. Just selects one area, and you've got the resonance knob. Band pass 12, same deal, but more extreme. Okay, so a notch is what happens if you turn a band pass upside down. So here's a visual representation. So this is our notch, and the other thing that's unique about notches is it actually completely removes all of the frequency information. So it's not like I'm reducing the frequency of one area, it is I am completely removing it. And then resonance shapes how big of an area you're removing. So as I shift, might be here. Let's do this with a noise oscillator just so you can kind of get an idea of that. Yeah. It's a cool sound. Anyway, so yeah, that's our notch filter. And same deal here. And you can actually hear our time control, which we haven't gotten to yet, but if you watch, you're going to see the notch filter pull out different frequencies. Did you see that? So that's because we have our envelope on, or our time control, but we'll come back there. So 2-pole and 4-pole, that is a measurement of how extreme. So you can think 2-pole is kind of like 12 dB and 4-pole is kind of like 24 dB. There we go. Okay, high pass. High pass is a reverse low pass, and what that does is it takes all of the information from the bottom and it says we're getting rid of you. So anything higher than the filter frequency is allowed to pass, but anything below cannot. So as I increase the frequency, it actually cuts out the low end. So sometimes this can be useful if you're trying to get a little bit of extra information in the top end, get something that's a little bit more punchy. Okay, so that's our high pass. 24 is also just more extreme. And the formant is really interesting. So formants kind of create a talking sound. And formants are complicated filters because they're almost more like an EQ. They're boosting and cutting multiple frequencies to create that effect. All right, so those are our filters. Now, for me, the most common is definitely using low pass, and occasionally the high pass or the formant, but really whatever makes sense for what you're working on. But turn this off for now. Okay, moving left to right again. This is our amp envelope. Nope, sorry, the envelope's down here. But this is our amplitude control. And this is really simple. We've got volume. And we've got pan. And so it's just kind of like, a master fader where you can control the level and the pan. And when you have more than one amplifier, that can be particularly helpful if you want one sound to be slightly louder or slightly more quiet. Okay, so quick review. We've got our oscillator section. We have 4 oscillators. We have our sine wave. We have our sawtooth. We have our square. We have noise. We've got an octave control, which moves our oscillator 12 half steps, 8 white keys, or doubles the frequency of the oscillator. We've got semi, which moves things by a semitone or a half step, and we've got detune, which is the smallest way we can alter the pitch, and that can go a maximum of a minor third down or up. Cool. Moving right along, this is our filter, and we talked about all of these different types of filters. Now, if you want this written down, what you can do is you can go ahead and check out in the details below. I have something called the Quick Synth Map you can download totally for free that breaks down all of this information in a one-page, really quick-to-digest format. But we've got these low-pass filters, which says everything below our frequency will pass. We've got band pass, which isolates an individual frequency. We've got notch, which cuts out individual frequencies. We've got high pass, which says everything above our frequency may pass. And we've got formant, which kind of makes talking noises. So that's what we got for our filters. And our final area here is our amp, and our amp controls the levels and the pans. Wow, that's a ton of info. Okay, so this is analog. This is how this is done up here. But now we need to talk about these contextual menus in the middle here. So I mentioned earlier that music is sound over time, and so is any instrument that you're going to be using. It is some sort of a sound being manipulated across a timeline. That's going to have pitch changes. That's going to have resonance changes. That's going to be changing in your ears for the duration of the sound. And so to get a synthesizer to sound anything like a real instrument, we must use time controls. So under our oscillator, our pitch envelope looks a little bit different than our other envelopes. And that's just because of how analog sets it up. Sometimes they look the same, sometimes they look different. But this is going to control how long it takes to get from not the starting pitch to the starting pitch. Remember we said attack, decay, sustain, release. But in this case, we just really have attack. So make it really extreme so you can hear it. It's going to start 1 or 2 octaves below the note and swing up. It's quite a bit more than 1 or 2 octaves. So that's pretty cool. And if we do a little bit less, gets sort of an interesting effect. And this is actually the way that you might go about making a synth horn patch, is by quickly modulating the pitch envelope. Now, our time control, which we can access through here or by dragging, controls how long it's going to take to get from its starting point to its ending point. So there is our pitch mod. And then we also have some other controls over here. And while we're in this contextual menu, I think we should take a look at them. So we're going to start over here with sub sync. So at the very beginning of this video, I was saying that analog is a 2 oscillator synthesizer, but it actually has a sub synth, which sort of makes it 3. So as I increase that level, you'll notice 1 octave below. And also, there are some other harmonics that kind of creep up with it. We can add that in. So that's going to add some depth to our sound. It's a nice feature. Now, if we want to control our pitch, remember, these are our time controls. We can also do that with an LFO. I wasn't going to do that here, but we're going to do it here. So I'm turning on an LFO, and an LFO is a low frequency oscillator. And again, I have all of this written in my quick synth map. So if you need a quick reference, feel free to download that from the details below. But as I increase the LFO amount, it's going to start to change the pitch over time. So check it out here. Now the same thing can be done to the pulse width. So we talked about the pulse width a little bit earlier. So this adjusts the pulse width. But if I wanted a sound to do this sort of without me having to actually alter it, I could just change this LFO. And it would do it for me. So that's another time control that we have in this menu. All right, so pitch mod, we've got our pitch envelope. Our time, how long it takes to get from the starting point to the resting point, and then we also have our sub. Cool. So our time controls for the filter are quite different from our oscillator, but it's actually the more common way. So we've got a slope here, and this is just a picture version of what is happening. So we have attack, which is the amount of time it takes to go from 0 to full expression. We have decay, which is the amount of time it takes to go from full expression to resting level. We have sustain, which is the level that it rests at, and we have release, which is the amount of time it takes to get down to 0. So we can adjust these features, but they will only work if our envelope is engaged here. So I'm going to just leave all of these, and I'm going to increase the envelope so you can hear what happens. So you're hearing at the end that beow, right? And that's because the filter is going back to the starting level at the very end. But we can actually adjust this to create a punch or a quick attack, especially if we're using a low pass filter. So I'm going to set my attack here. We'll start at 50. And I'm going to bring my envelope down to 4. Pro tip, if you click on an area and type in a number, it'll do it for you. It's a little bit better than having to go through it and drag with your mouse. So we've got that set at 4. We've got our attack at 50, which I like, but this release is way too long. Maybe we'll make it longer, because I don't want to hear that. So we could adjust that in the amp level, but I don't want to skip ahead. So now you can hear we're starting to get a punch. So when I take this filter off, we have this. When I turn it on, we have a lot more. Now we can increase how much punch there is by decreasing our decay time. Because it's going to bring it back down. So now we have a synthesizer that has a lot of punch, but there are actually 2 buttons over here that change how that works. So if I check legato, what's going to happen is this filter is only going to refire when my notes are disconnected. Just so you can hear this a little bit better. And free will refire for every note, even if you're holding them down. Now, we've got some other options to change the filter. So we've got some filter drive, which sort of adds a little bit of a different sound, right? And then we've got our frequency modulator. So in the same way that we were able to alter the pitch over time with our LFO, we can do that with the filter. So you can see that LFO moving. Let's increase the All right, enough of that. But that's a good, fun thing to be able to do. LFO. Now, key controls how much the filter cutoff changes based off what key you're playing. So if you're trying to create like a brass patch, or you're trying to create maybe even a bass patch, you might want the filter to follow the frequency that you're playing. So as I increase how much key tracking, we've got a way more open filter than when I play down here. So the lower end is like audible, right? because the filter is so closed. So that's our key tracking. Okay, now our resonance mod works the same way. So it's how much is this knob affected by the LFO, the key, and the envelope. Rarely do I touch this. However, you might want to. Maybe I should be using that more often. That's a great sound. Okay, so that's all I got in this area for you. Oh, one more thing. Linear versus exponential. I generally prefer to use linear because it just makes sense in my brain a little bit more. That being said, exponential, it's got curves. It's a little bit more natural. So you can experiment and see what you like. All right, amplitude, the amplitude envelope. This is volume over time. So if I bring this attack way up, it takes a long time to hear the sound come from. It's a pretty cool sound. And what it's nice about this is we've not really done a ton. We've just got a square wave. There's a filter on it. We played with the amp, and all of a sudden, this sound has got sass. That's our attack time. Now, we can use this to help create a bit of snap. But the deal is this. It's got to work in time with our filter frequency. So I've got a 97 millisecond attack here. If this attack is set faster than this attack, it's going to lose its effect, right? So you can hear it a bit because the sound is coming up, but not as much as if you let the volume come up and then let the filter open. Sustain is particularly important, especially in the amp area, because this controls how loud the sound stays, right? So if I brought this sustain all the way down, this is what we'd have. And remember, because legato is keyed in, and I know you can't see my fingers right now, but I was playing legato, so that filter wasn't happening. It wasn't re-triggering. So if I bring this decay down, right, it's a really quick sound. And I'm just wondering, it's like a laser. Or kind of like a chirping bird. So you can kind of create some interesting things with that. But in general, the more normal sounds, the sounds that we maybe create. If you want to have something with some punch, you can set your sustain a little lower. And that'll work with the filter to give you that punch. Now, if you're playing a pad, you don't want the volume level to come back down, right? So let me decrease the envelope amount here and just play a lot, defeat the way that a pad is supposed to sound. So some thoughts to bear with there. Now, we've got some other modifiers. We've got our pan mod, which can be controlled by this LFO. So as I increase again the LFO, it's going to go from side to side. I've got key, and you could have key effect pan. And it'll switch sides on you as you change the keyboard. And then you can have how much does the envelope affect the pan, which is interesting. We also have this envelope velocity. So how hard I hit the keyboard affect the amount the envelope will kick. So this gives us some touch sensitivity, and also this guy here. Okay, so level mod, we can change the volume or based on the key. So those are our time controls. Now we've got these two master controls, and the reason that I call them master controls is because they affect everything. They affect all of the other parameters, or they have the ability to. So we already looked at LFO a little bit, but we've got this control here, which is how fast is this LFO going to modulate. But we can change it to different types of waves, whatever works for you. So here's a rectangle wave, and if I apply that to pitch, it's going to jump. Right? If I apply a triangle to pitch, it's pretty similar to a sine wave, a little bit more extreme. If I apply that to my filter, and then my square here, okay. Now we've also got a delay and an attack. So how long am I going to wait before the LFO kicks in? And then we've got this attack, which will slowly fade it in. Which is a little bit less extreme. You can use this to create like a bit of a vibrato effect. But we also have a vibrato button here, so we'll get there in a second. And we have a second LFO down here, but we can also have it set to the rate of the metronome. Which will give us an interesting pulsing sound. Okay, those are our LFOs. Turn this off for now. Let's go into our master tab here. Now we've got our volume, and that controls our overall volume output. But I want to start with this unison down here. Now what unison does is it takes your signal, doubles it, and slightly detunes it. And that gives you this giant sound. It's a huge sound. So as I increase this, all of a sudden I've got this detuned, thick sound. And this is just a square wave with some unison. I'll put a sine wave on though so you can hear what it does to something less complicated. So all of a sudden I've got some more harmonic information happening because it doubles what we've got here. So unison. Now, vibrato is what sounds like, right? Contextual menu over here, we can actually set how long it takes for the vibrato to kick in, either by using the attack or by using the delay. And I actually like to bring this down to like the 4 something. For vibrato. And then we've got our glissando down here. So what this does is it connects sound. So remember at the beginning where we had this pitch thing happening, we can create an effect that's a little bit more intelligent because it's tied to whatever you were originally talking about. So and this says how long it will take. So 100% sounds like a crashing plane, but a little bit can be nice. Now, if I turn on that legato button, it is only going to create that glide effect if the second note is played before the first note. So that's our legato. All right, so let's see. Did we miss anything in here? Yeah, so stretch and error. Is nice. So once upon a time, when all synthesizers were actual pieces of hardware, oscillators were like these spinning discs, right? And they didn't always stay in tune that well. So this is a way to model that a little bit. And when you start to have multiple sounds, and I'm kind of just creating something quick here. Turn up this error. Introduces a little bit more variation in pitch, which is not bad. You know, it's a good thing to have. Oh, looks like Intelligent Investor is here. Happy that you have joined us, and I'm glad that I'm able to help you understand synthesis. Cool. So that is our error. And then we've got detune, which is what it sounds like. And we can adjust the keyboard as well. So if I want everything transposed up an octave, I can do that from here. Pitch bend range, which has to do with the pitch bend on your keyboard itself. And then stretch changes the type of tuning. So it's 0%. Everything is going to be in tune. And as we reach 100, it goes to a different type of tuning, which could be a cool effect. All right, let's build a giant sound. Intelligent Investor. Yes, every single Thursday we talk about sound design. Happy to have you here. If you click into this video, there's a thing that will ding you for a reminder for when they go on. All right, so let's build a pad. That's the simplest thing to build, and we can make use of all of the things we have already learned today. So over here, we're going to start, remember, left to right. We're going to start with 2 sawtooth waves. But let's get back to our regular settings here before we go doing anything so you can follow along. So, whoa, it's a little bit loud. Sweet. So here it is. Here's the sound. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by trying to create some variation in what we're hearing. So one really easy way to do that is to introduce some detuning. So already you can hear that sound has very much changed. Pretty cool. But, you know, I'm noticing that I actually right now am only hearing it come through amp 1. So this is something that I skipped. We want everything to go straight across. So you can do that really quickly by just clicking this top left. Now we're actually hearing two different. It's not quite behaving the way I expected it to. Let's do top right. There we go. Sweet. So we've already got a decent sound. So no reason to have a pitch envelope on the pad. So we'll leave that at 0. We're going to move along to the filter. Now, this is going to be a pad sound, but we want to remember is this is subtractive synthesis. So the larger we can get this sound, the better. So this is a pretty large sound. Now, if I was going to transform this into a pad that I couldn't really play with necessarily, I would pull this down. Pretty vanilla. So let's figure out a way to make it a little less vanilla. Let's start by adding some... Oh, sub is already in. Oops. All right. So let's start by... let's see here. We want to kind of have this fade in a little bit more, so I'm going to increase the attack. Remember, this is our time control. And we want some variation in pitch here. So I'm going to turn my LFO on. It's controlling something. It might be the filter. So we're going to add just a touch of LFO. I'm going to do the same thing, opposite direction. Here. So now we've really got some different stuff happening. I'm digging that. So I'm going to turn my unison on. Sweet. All right, so we're at a good start here. Now, if I was going to be using this to play it live, what I would do is I'd put this auto filter afterwards. Quick Synth Map from the comments below. Okay, also I might finish this off with a bit of reverb. So we've got a decent sound there. So this is like a super simple pad. But listen, here is a pro tip, okay? I've just shown you every single thing that you need to know about where the controls are in analog. So if you are in a place now where you're like, I want to learn more, how do I do that? This is what you're going to do. Head over here to categories and click this drop down, and you are going to see a ton of presets. And you're going to look at it and see what they did. So let's see. 80s wave pad. Let's see what that is. That looks complicated. Let's not do that one. Let's do bright buzz pad. All right, here's what it sounds like. Now you might be like, how did they make this sound? Well, what do we know about analog? We know that analog moves from left to right. So we've got a saw wave here, and we've got noise on the bottom. We've got this octave down, and we've got a tiny bit of transposition. We've got two filters, our low pass here, and then we've got a band pass, which remember that's isolating just a particular section, which makes sense because this is a noise oscillator. We've got both amps on. We've got them panned off a little bit. Some vibrato, unison, glide. Be willing to bet there's some LFO here on the pan. And we got the sound. Now, if you really wanted to understand this, what you could do is go ahead and drag another version of analog here and just rebuild it, okay? But here's the deal, friends. This is everything about analog. If you are ready, if you're like, yeah, I want to learn more about synthesis, then go ahead and download that quick Synth Map. And if you want more videos just like this one, there's a companion course that comes with that quick Synth Map if you upgrade, and it really breaks down all of these concepts. But that is all for today. Now, remember, every single Thursday at 1 o'clock, I am going to be talking about sound design. So make sure you are subscribed and tuned in if this is the type of thing that really interests you. Guys, thanks for spending an hour of time just doing synthesis stuff with me. It really is a ton of fun. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions. There is contact information below. And if you really want to go deeper, there is a private coaching link down there as well. All right, that is all for today.